Thank you for downloading this edition of Against the Odds. This recording lasts for approximately 45 minutes and is copyright. No unauthorized broadcasting, public performance, or copying is permitted without the expressed permission of the copyright owner, Philip Francis Anderson. To find out more and to request to be a guest in an upcoming episode, visit the Against the Odds page of philip-anderson.co.uk. Welcome to Against the Odds, the bi-monthly motivational podcast profiling the lives of individuals who have conquered in the face of adversity. Produced and presented by Philip Francis Anderson.
Welcome to this final installment of this two-part podcast, Surviving Prematurity, What Blindness Means for Those Born Early, with my guest, Martin Rhodes. Martin was born 3 months premature and spent the first 12 weeks of his life in an incubator.
She didn't get that much chance to sort of hold me, really, apart from a few times sort of when I was first born. She felt like I was never going to see my home, if you like. I think she thought that the hospital was going to be my home for a long, long time, really.
Martin is said to be one of 60,000 born premature every year in the UK alone, where it's estimated 2,000 are either born blind or go blind later in life, either as a consequence of too much oxygen or a direct result of a late diagnosis.
It can also be responsible for damaging certain parts of your brain. So, for example, it was always said that I did have mild learning difficulties. It does take me longer to grasp concepts, if you like, than perhaps most.
Beside the physical aspects, Martin will conduct us through both the emotional and psychological elements of his prematurity.
There was a huge degree of negligence. I mean, my mum, she did consult a solicitor. They said that there wasn't enough evidence to press charges or, to make a case.
While discussing the painful consequences of his parents' divorce 32 years on.
He left it as a key stage, really, in my development. I'm so glad that my mother was able to sort of pick up the pieces, really, whilst dealing with the blow herself.
Surviving Prematurity, the final chapter.
This is Against the Odds with Philip Anderson.
Martin, you were born in 1982, so that's 39 years ago. And I wondered what sort of support was available to your family at that time, because in talking with other premature survivors, those who were born in the 1970s and even earlier in the 1960s, counselling was a no-no, and what medical information was available, they said wasn't really worth knowing. And so I wondered really what was available to your parents at your birth.
Not a great deal, to be honest. In terms of emotional support, obviously, she did receive a lot of that from immediate family. There was no counselling offered to myself or my mum, really. Now, what was a big help to her was a friend of mine was also born prematurely at this similar sort of time to me, and her mum became friends with my mum. So, of course, there was two people there who were in the same boat. So I think she became a tower of strength for my mum, and my mum became just as much of a tower of strength to her, really. I think that helped her a lot.
But in terms of your mother coming to a realisation of the implications associated with your prematurity, how did she come to that understanding about what had happened and what it meant for you?
She discussed a lot with my paediatrician at the time, and she also read a lot about, she read a lot of books about prematurity, did various other forms of research where she could find that information from different resources, and that really helped her. That helped her a lot to come to terms with things. But any help that we received was sourced by ourselves. It was never offered.
And knowing that, how did it affect you when it came to you starting school, given the fact that there was limited information at your disposal, your family's disposal? Do you feel the school understood your situation enough?
In some ways, yeah, especially when it comes to numeracy. Like, numeracy was something I always struggled with, and I do even to this day. I can count money, For example, if I go to a shop and obviously buy something, I know how much change I'll get, for example. But my numeracy skills are definitely affected as a result of my prematurity. I don't know whether there's a certain part of your brain, if you like, that deals with those skills, but it's definitely affected by it. The school were very sympathetic about that, which I appreciated. Yeah, they were really, really helpful. Like, sometimes it would take me slightly longer than others to work on mathematical questions, if you like.
That's interesting, because when I was at school, my sort of medical situation didn't seem to be taken into account, and I was labelled a lazy child or a disruptive pupil. And that, again, was down to their ignorance of what was the underlying causes of that behaviour.
Yeah, I was quite lucky, really, that the fact that they dealt with my situation the way they did. And my brother, on the other hand, had a completely different experience because he has autism, so he was labelled as a disruptive, lazy child. Whereas I guess I got lucky there, really.
How much do you know about your prematurity? Are there any symptoms you're displaying currently which have yet to be linked?
It's an interesting question. There are other things I would like to know about my prematurity, especially now. Now I'm older. Obviously, I'm more aware, more self-aware. Like, for example, I'd like to know, like, my lack of ability to retain information when it comes to numeracy was a big obstacle for me growing up, and also, like, I struggle to grip things, and I struggle to point. Like, you use your index finger and sort of point at something, for example, if I need to. I find that I get pain in my fingers when I try and do that, and I often wonder whether that might be because I might have mild cerebral palsy, perhaps. I prefer to use plastic-handled spoons for making tea and coffee, for example. I struggle to grip the spoon and stir.
And that is a byproduct, or more than likely a byproduct, of prematurity?
I believe so. I mean, it might not be, but I believe so. I mean, I suppose I'll never know that, really, but it's something that I definitely feel I've struggled with as I've got older, definitely. I've noticed. And I can't think of anything else that I could attribute it to, really. Again, all these things have come to light since I've got older, and I've thought about, like, I've started to notice changes in me physically and mentally, but perhaps more physically. I felt like as I was growing up that we were all learning as we went along, really. So not only was I learning about my prematurity, but my teachers were as well. And, everyone around me was. I feel like it was quite a new concept for all, really. Because unless you've experienced it, or you're working with someone who has experienced it, you'll never get to learn about it. So I feel like it was a bit of a
learning curve.
A learning curve, yeah. Everybody's learning as they go along, if you like.
Yeah. What about spatial awareness and general dexterity?
Dexterity, I'm not so bad with. I do struggle to lift things sometimes, though, again, but that's more down to grip issues. Spatial awareness is okay, although I feel like it's perhaps got slightly worse as I've got older, and especially during the pandemic. Obviously, I haven't been getting out as much, so maybe that hasn't helped.
If you were ever given the opportunity to, say, meet with a medical professional on prematurity, what questions would you be asking of them?
I'd be curious to know, or what other aspects of me aren't as perhaps well honed as they would be if I wasn't premature. And how would we go about identifying those? Had these things been identified when I was younger, they would have been easier to diagnose. And because I'm older now, will they be harder to diagnose?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And let's hope one day you're afforded that opportunity to sit down with a consultant and hopefully explore matters in more detail to your satisfaction. And talking of consultants, going back to when you were born, obviously so much has occurred as a direct consequence of your prematurity. The fact that you were given too much oxygen, which has now left you totally blind, and various other symptoms you've described, such as your inability to grip, etc., which you feel may be a byproduct of your prematurity. Do you ever hold any of them responsible for what has happened?
I do, yeah. There was a huge degree of negligence. I mean, my mum, she did consult a solicitor, but they said that there wasn't enough evidence to press charges, or even to make a case. So it was something that was just left. But yeah, I do. There is an element of resentment, if you like, and I do feel I wish things could have worked out differently. I wish my mum could have had the explanations at the time, so that she could have then passed on that knowledge to me, and maybe then I would have dealt with my prematurity a lot differently. Because I would have had more of an understanding.
So she never received a proper closure, really?
Not really, no.
No.
But I mean, obviously, we're going back to the 80s. I guess things are a lot different now. It was just left, really.
Do you feel there has been sort of significant progress in terms of what we understand now about prematurity that perhaps your mum didn't understand 39, 40 years ago?
Yes, I do. I think now there's a lot more information, obviously, especially, because obviously the internet usage is more prevalent now amongst a lot of people, isn't it? Everyone's pretty much got home broadband or some sort of access to the internet. So I think that's been a huge help for people to understand. But I still think there's limited literature out there, though, and any new information that comes to light as a result of people's research, if that can be publicised, then that's absolutely fantastic.
Well, they reckon there's 1 in 13. I think 1 in every 13 babies are born premature.
Yeah, somebody
UK.
else did.
Yeah.
Somebody did mention this to me. Yeah, a while ago. Well, that's quite something.
How does it feel knowing that you share a similar experience to that of Stevie Wonder? Or no, he shares your eye condition anyway.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when I found it. It might have been yourself who told me that actually a few weeks ago, and I was quite surprised to learn that. Yeah, wow.
You don't feel as though you're on your own?
No, I feel like I'm in good company.
Does that help you, though? Do you find that reassuring?
Yeah, I do. I mean, really, anybody who has a similar situation to yourself, it's just nice to know that you're not adrift. There is somebody in the same boat. There is, you're not on your own.
Well, it's good to see that positive attitude pervading here, Martin. I'm sure it's helped you on many occasions and will continue to do so. And the ideal opportunity, I think, for us to pause a moment before we go on to discuss your family issues, and namely your father leaving the matrimonial home and the deleterious effects that had on you growing up, to discussing 1 or 2 coping strategies you've deployed that's helped you in addition to positivity during some of the more trying moments in your daily life. Because in your questionnaire you returned, you said that one of the other things that affects you from time to time is this overwhelming feeling of lethargy that just seems to appear out of nowhere, that prevents you from doing sometimes the smallest things, such as visiting the shops. Something that you do on a regular basis without effort, but other days it's almost as though you struggle to see it through, or you feel as though it's almost an impossible task for you to accomplish. And I wondered, what sort of coping strategies have you deployed which you find helpful during these trying moments that also may be of interest to others listening today?
I like to listen to music. I find music can help. Classical music, piano music kind of thing can help sometimes, or just to sit in silence and just relax. Even just to sort of maybe go and lie down for a while. Just lie on my back for like 20, 30 minutes and just relax, literally just relax, switch off. I don't necessarily sleep, just relax. Just literally just lie down and just take some time out. Feel like a battery recharge, I guess.
Do you have any favourite sounds and favourite places you like to go that really help you as well?
I like the sound of running water. I find it really, really therapeutic. So I like to go and sit perhaps by the lake, or like sometimes where my mum lives. My mum lives behind the canal. So I like to go and sit by the canal sometimes and listen to the locks running, like the water running through the locks. I find that really therapeutic. I've always had a thing about running water and fire as well, crackling fire, like coal fires or like open fires. I love the sound of fire.
Were there a lot of sound of crackling fires in your childhood that perhaps, you're equating this with?
Not really that I can remember. No, not really. I just enjoy that sound, really. I always have done. No, I can't remember anything in my childhood as such that I can trace that back to.
I often wonder whether because you missed out on a lot of that initial bonding, that holding process with your mother, because of the 12 weeks or so you spent in an incubator, perhaps the brain is yearning for, senses that void or that absence, and is compensating with this whole notion or concept of crackling fires and the soothing sound of running water. So it's replaced the comfort, the warm, comforting embrace that you missed with the sound of running water and crackling fires, because it's something perhaps you didn't experience as a child, and that's what's given you the internal comforts now, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah, could well be. Interesting. I like the sound of the birds, like the dawn chorus, nature, that kind of thing. Yeah, it could be. Quite something.
If you have a story of your own to share, or you would like to be involved with the podcast in some other way, email ifl@philip-anderson.co.uk.
When I was around 6 years old, my relationship with my father suffered, especially emotionally. I feel like he struggled to accept the fact that I was visually impaired. It's always something that he lived in denial of, really. And I think a lot of that is perhaps to do with the fact that I couldn't do things that children, if you like, that were my age could do with sight. He struggled to relate to the fact that I had to do things differently or adapt things slightly. I remember going to the shops, for example, or if we used to go to the park, for example, he struggled with the idea of guiding me. I mean, he would, but it was not something that he wanted to do. And I always picked up on the fact that was something that he struggled with.
That must have been very hurtful for you.
Yes, yeah, it was. And it's something that stayed with me. I felt like we didn't have that bond. We didn't have that physical sort of connection between father and son. We didn't, and that culminated with the lack of emotional bond. It was quite hurtful, really. And especially if I compare that to the bond I had with my mother and my grandfather and the other members of my family. It really stands out. When I was 6 years old and my father eventually left, he used my blindness as one of the reasons. My mum told me that that's what he said when he left. I'm glad, looking back, that I heard it from her and not from him, because I may have found it more difficult to deal with had I have heard it from him than from her.
How old were you when your mum told you that?
I was about 8 years old eventually, when we eventually sat down and talked about it. Because I asked her about it. We had a discussion about it, about, why he left. And she said, no, he actually blames you for the main reason why he left. But really, he left because she confronted him about his alcohol addiction issues. And he suggested that it was down to me, and he couldn't cope with the fact that I was visually impaired. He couldn't deal with having a son who was disabled. So
basically you were the scapegoat because he wanted to deny the fact that he had got an alcohol problem.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could say that. So it was quite a difficult time, but I'm glad that he did leave, because if he hadn't have left when he did and he just stayed, things could have got quite difficult.
Did you find he was the sort of father who would occasionally sit with you at the table and go over your sort of homework with you or any schoolwork with you at all? Do you remember anything like that happening?
Not really, Philip, no, to be honest. Partly because he wasn't the most educated of people, really. So he never took an interest in what my homework was or what I was doing at school or anything like that. That was more my mum and my granddad's side of things, if you like.
Did you want him to?
Yeah, I would have liked him to, because my mum and my granddad did. So I always wondered why he didn't. I wondered why to him I was so different. So that felt strange as a child. It's quite a lot for me to take in, really.
Was he ever at home when you got home from school? And
sometimes he'd be home, like on his days off, he'd be home, or weeks off, he'd be home when I got home from school. He'd never allude to what I was doing at school or take an interest in what work I was doing at the time, or how my overall studying was going. Not really.
And obviously placing more responsibility on the shoulders of your mother at that time.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I don't really know where I'd be now if it wasn't for the role that my mother and my grandfather played in my life. I wouldn't be the person I am today, really. I've got so much to thank them for.
So how old were you when your father left? 6?
6, yeah. He left it as a key stage, really, in my development. I'm so glad that my mother was able to sort of pick up the pieces, really, whilst dealing with the blow herself. I mean, not only did it affect me, it obviously affected her as well. So whilst dealing with the emotional blow of how it affected her, she was still able to fulfill her role as my mother. And that is, well, it's a great testament, really, to the person that I am today.
Do you think she was also trying to assume the male role at the same time?
Yes, I do. I really do. And that is no easy feat for anybody. Like, I don't blame anyone. There's one thing I will say. I don't hold anyone accountable. Life is a series of events, and we all have our trials and tribulations. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, or we come across obstacles, we've got to pick ourselves up and try and move on from them as best we can.
Were there times when you almost felt the relationship between you was normal? Was there ever a point?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I remember a time when he first took the stabilizers off my bike. This is when I was like 10, 11 years old, I think I was. And I'll never forget that. For that particular moment, there was a father and son bond. Like he did that for me, and he aided me to learn to ride my bike.
It was almost like you'd acknowledged a sense of achievement in you. You'd reached another milestone in your life, and
absolutely,
he was celebrating that with you.
Yeah, and I was quite touched by it. I felt like he'd overcome, or he'd learned to accept that I had a disability and that I could do things, but differently. I had to adapt things slightly, and I felt like he came to terms with those adaptations that I had to implement in order to flourish.
Had he come to terms with it?
Well, perhaps not, looking back, because these were times when he wasn't drinking, and there was more times when he was in drink, if you like, than not. So that the times when he wasn't were so few and far between that I couldn't appreciate them as much as I should, because I felt like they were overshadowed more by the times when he was in drink than when he wasn't, if that makes sense.
What lengths would your father go to feed his drinking habit, Martin?
Well, to give you an example, he once went to Alfred's and he stole some bike lights, believe it or not, and placed them on my brother's person. And my brother was about 6 or 7 years old, around about that sort of age at the time. And for your father to put you through such an ordeal as a young child was quite something. I mean, they took my father in for questioning, and they brought my brother home in the police car. And that's something that my brother remembers now. I mean, he's in his 20s now, and he still remembers that. There was also another incident. My father fell asleep in the chair. They had food cooking in the kitchen. They had the pans on the oven, and there was food cooking. And he fell asleep and forgot about the pans. And had he not have woken up when he did, there would have been a house fire. It was just about to start burning.
And
who was woken up and seen that.
Who was in the house at the time?
Just me and him. I couldn't remember this personally. My mum told me about this story. I couldn't remember this personally.
So she came home to find the house almost in flames?
Yes. Yeah. Had he not have acted quickly, had he not have woke up, and there would have no doubt been a house fire. So it's just amazing, really, how somebody can be driven by drink, how drink can become such a demon to somebody. The idea that you can just forget everything around you and just neglect everything just for the sake of drinking is quite something, really. I never understand that.
Addiction's a very powerful thing, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely it is.
Has it made you think twice about drink or addiction generally?
Yes, it has. I mean, I like a drink. I like the occasional drink at weekends, but I don't very rarely drink during the week. Very rarely. And then when I've had enough, like when I'm done, I'm done. If you like, when I want to stop, I'm stopped, and that's it.
But presumably, he didn't make drink all that appealing to you, though.
No. And I think that's because I saw the consequences of his actions when he was in drink. I always said to myself, I'm never going to end up like that. I never want to make those mistakes. So I guess in some ways, whilst it was difficult to deal with at the time and quite traumatic, it's also done me a favour because it's turned me into the person I am today.
It's amazing it didn't put you off drink altogether.
Yes, it is. It is really, yeah, because a lot of people would have been, and I can understand that. Yeah. But I'm always aware of it, though. I am always aware of, when I drink, I'm always aware of what happened and how things were.
It's amazing how you've managed to cope with that, because I'm sure whenever you open your first pint, memories of your dad and so on, they must enter your consciousness at that point.
Sometimes they do, yeah, I must admit they do. Yeah, and if I allow myself to think about it too much, it doesn't help me. It's not healthy for me, So I try not to. I try not to think about it too much. I try and just enjoy the moment, and I try and think, well, you're having this pint, you open this can because you fancy a beer.
Does it worry you when you're watching other people drinking to excess, to the point where it's changing their characters? Does that sometimes disturb you?
Yes, it does, because it can become their life. Drink can become your life. Any kind of addiction, not just drink, any addiction. When it drives you, when it becomes your reason to get up in the morning, that's when you think, hang on a minute, there's an issue here. Something needs to be addressed here. That's a situation that I'd never, ever want to find myself in.
It makes you wonder, in a way, why your mother married your dad, doesn't it, to some degree?
Yes, it does. I mean, she said before that I don't think she ever really wanted to marry him, in all honesty. Not in the long run. I mean, I think one of the reasons why she did is because my nan and granddad, so my mum's mother and father, they paid for the wedding. And I think because they were paying for it, my mum wanted them to see her have a special day, if you like.
And she wouldn't have had you?
No. There were pluses to it, of course. Obviously, that she had me and she had my brother, but I don't really think she wanted to marry him, really, no. And that's made me very cautious as well about relationships and entering into relationships. What I mean is, like, I could only enter into a relationship if I was really sure that things would work between me and that person. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. It sounds like your father's created a lot of confusion in your mind, in terms of maybe your identity, your inward beliefs, your self-confidence. There's a lot of undermining that perhaps you've experienced. Yeah, no doubt there is. That's where my granddad played a fantastic role, really, in being the father figure. I mean, even though he couldn't be around all the time, his role complemented my mother's role in my life, if you like. In what way? As the male role model. Like if my mum was working, like, my granddad would come and look after me, and he'd talk to me about, his army days. He'd talk to me about, what life was like when he was younger and compared to sort of how life was when I was growing up. And I used to find those stories fascinating. I used to find it a real nice bonding time. Like we used to go to the shops for things, or walk in the park. Oh. And it was quite nice. And were you able to make sense of the two sets of parenting roles, so to speak? Because obviously your grandfather was coming from a slightly more traditional perspective, and your mother was perhaps coming from a very much younger perspective. Do you think the two complemented each other? Yes, I do. Very much so. I feel like I was given the chance to see both sides of the coin, if you like. It's a similar situation that I alluded to in the previous podcast that I did, that we did, about the difference between going to mainstream school and specialist education. It's the same kind of thing. So I had the more traditional values from my grandfather, and then I had the younger sort of outlook, if you like, from my mum, and I find that really did help me. Were there conflicts occasionally where perhaps your grandfather was, more insistent on something, and your mother was perhaps a little more relaxed about something? In some cases, yeah, there was. But I don't think there was as many conflicts as perhaps there would have been, because my mum was quite old-fashioned as well. Although she was young, obviously because she was raised by my granddad as well, because obviously it was her father. There was probably less of that than there could have been. Less of those conflicts than there could have been. Was your grandfather sort of very pro-physical discipline? Yes, he was, yeah. Yeah, he was, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And my mum was as well, to a big degree. Maybe not quite as much as my grandfather, but she was when we were younger. She still would be as well, probably, if I stepped out of line.
Oh, yes, of course.
Now. No doubt about it.
I was just wondering, just sort of tying the two in and then looking at the way your father behaved. Now, for some children, it's not always easy to differentiate between discipline and abuse.
No.
And I just wondered whether there was an element of that, confusion that crept into your life.
I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no. What I will say is it's difficult to remember, obviously, because it's so long ago. It's difficult to remember, really. I've thought about this quite a lot, obviously, prior to this interview, and it's really made me think, and I found it such a huge help. But there are a lot of things that I can't remember so well.
Well, that's an interesting point, Martin, and it's got me thinking about compare and contrast. And if you were to say, look at the two contrasting aspects of your father's character, what would you say they were?
It's an interesting question. Probably, I would say the best moment was probably when he took the stabilizer off my bike. I felt a real connection there. I felt like there was a real understanding just for that in that particular moment in time. And probably the worst aspect was like if we went to the park or went to the shops or something, we decided to stop and buy a beer, and like he'd make me wait outside the shop while he went in to buy beer and come back, came out again. That was a difficult time.
How have you made sense of the two contrasting experiences?
I guess it's the ability to compartmentalize things, really. One is something I'll never forget, and it was a fantastic moment. The other one is, well, I'll remember it, but I'd rather not. So I'll just push it to the back of my mind, usually.
Do you think they've stayed in your mind for a reason?
Yeah, definitely. They've stayed in my mind because, to me, they're symbols of two totally different aspects of his personality. So, and I think they are the two things that I'll remember. And that's why they've always stayed with me, I think. They've both got their own significance. Yeah, no doubt about it.
This is Against the Odds with Philip Anderson. Join Philip's friendly Facebook community group for a refreshing insight into the world of independence, where you'll be able to meet new friends and share your experiences. To join, visit facebook.com/groups/independence for life.
What were you witnessing in terms of his behaviour when he was under your roof? Were there any disturbing times that you can recall that left you anxious, fractious, uneasy, unhappy, worried?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, there was a time when, back in the 6 years old, approaching 7, and he went out one night and got quite drunk because he used to play pool, and he came home and my mum wouldn't let him into the house because she said, look, I'm not going to let you in that state. And it's not the first time you've come home in this state. I'm not letting you in. So he got angry and he started throwing bricks at the window, started punching the door, for example. And he would have never have behaved like that had he not been, been drunk. I can't describe the transformation. It was unbelievable, really.
What were you thinking at that point?
Well, I was sort of quite frightened. I was thinking, this isn't good for my mum. And I was only like 6 years old, so approaching 7. Didn't know how to act, really. I was quite nervous. Didn't know what to think, really.
Were you upstairs or downstairs at the time?
I was upstairs at the time. I was, it was late in the evening, so I was upstairs at the time. I was sort of in my bed, and I didn't really know how to react to it. Really, it was quite frightening.
Well, that's a very traumatic experience you've described there, Martin. One which I think no child should ever be expected to witness at that age.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that I try not to think about now going forward. Something that I've boxed and put to the back of my mind, really. I find it easier that way.
How long did that outburst go on for?
Maybe a good 30 minutes or so. Although it seemed a lot longer to me.
Well, it would at your age, coming on 7. I mean, things can seem like eternity.
Of course, yeah. And obviously I felt quite helpless, really. Obviously not being able to do anything, not being able to help my mother and, because obviously I couldn't see. So that made it worse as well. I guess that intensified my helplessness, really, being visually impaired and knowing that there wasn't really a great deal I could do to help.
What did you think he would do at that time? What did you think would happen?
Well, he was quite angry, so I had no idea whether he might try and be physically violent to my mum or what would happen. Really, I had no idea. I was quite fearful at the time. That made me feel quite unnerved. All sorts of thoughts were going through my head. How can I help? What should I do? Should I call the police? What's the right thing to do? I was out of my depth, if you like.
It's difficult to know what to do, and I suppose at the end of the day, your own self-preservation was important as well.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Although I may not have thought about that at the time, but yeah, absolutely.
Was that a one-off, or had he behaved inappropriately and violently towards your mother in the past?
No, that was a one-off, really. I don't really recall any other times when there was any display of violence or anything. We were quite fortunate there, really. I'm not for 1 minute underestimating how bad that particular night was, because it was awful. So, yeah, drink can make people act.
Were the police involved?
No. It got resolved between them at the time. Luckily, we didn't involve the police. I think my dad just went to bed in the end. I think he just went to bed and slept it off, if you like. And it was resolved the next morning, just in chatting, I guess, in conversation. I strive to make sure that I would never behave that way. And if I ever have children in the future, they would never behave that way either. I guess it just makes you concentrate on becoming a better you.
Does it take suffering in order for you to develop empathy?
I think so, yeah, because only with understanding can there be acceptance. So, yeah, I guess so, yeah. Like in this case, yeah, definitely. Like, in some ways, I try and draw a positive from the whole experience. I try and think, well, if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be who I am. So in a way, the negatives can bring out the positives because you aspire to be as unlike what you've seen as you possibly can.
Has your father become a bit of a distant memory?
It's become a lot of a distant memory, to be honest. I very rarely even think about it. I mean, I'll give you an example. When he did pass away, I went to his funeral and I didn't really feel anything. I went to the gym the same day. I left, the funeral service and just carried on with my daily life. I carried on doing what I would have done.
So there was no love lost between you then?
Not really, no. No, not really. I didn't completely dislike him, but I can't say I loved him because I was never shown that affection from him.
Were there many other supporters who turned up?
There was a few people, few friends from my dad's work where he worked, and a few some of our family members came as well. I actually went with my nan and granddad.
Can you remember what the mood of the crowd was like on that day?
It was relatively somber, but I think a lot of people attended from work, like from where my dad worked, so they never knew what kind of home life we had. They saw him at work, not what he was like outside the workplace, if you like. So they had a completely different perception of him, if you like, than we had.
He was a good actor then.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing what you can hide, isn't it? When you need to, when you've got an addiction, I think you become quite good at hiding the parts of you that you don't want people to see.
Did anything come out at the funeral about his drinking at all, or how did the vicar paint him as a man?
They said he was a good person. He led quite a happy and fulfilled life, and they alluded to myself and my brother. And I sat there and I actually thought, this isn't the man I knew. This isn't my father that he's talking about. Because I had a completely different perception of him, and rightly so, considering how we lived.
Somber occasions like funerals, I suppose, for those who aren't acquainted with the family. As you've rightly said, they get a totally different picture because the only picture they get predominantly is the picture that's painted by the minister or the vicar leading the service on the day.
Exactly.
And, obviously during that service, there was a lot of divided thinking.
Absolutely.
Where on the one hand, for the familiar, there were those who were thinking, well, these are all just lies. And for other people, they were thinking, Oh, Martin was well blessed to have a very loving and caring and devoted father when that wasn't the case.
No. And I felt sorry for my nan and granddad really at the time, because obviously, considering what my father put my mum through as well, like the fact that they were willing to take me to the funeral as well and sit there with me and sit through that service, and for them to swallow that must have been so difficult for them, because obviously they knew what he was like, and they saw the way that he treated my mum, and they saw the way that he treated me. And then, that they had to go and listen to all, this story painted of him that was as far from the truth as you could possibly get. And but they did that for me. They did that so that I could attend my own father's funeral, which was the right thing to do. And that's why they did it, because we always try and do the right thing. I did have a moment where I thought, I wish things would have been different. Like I felt sorry, and I was sorry. I remember thinking, I'm sorry it worked out the way it did. I wish things could have been different. I wish things could have been better, but that was that. That was the way it was. I don't hold anyone responsible. I don't have any regrets.
Not even your father?
No, not at all. Because I may not have had the emotional understanding to see things the way I do now, but now I just think he just struggled with it. Not everyone can accept everything. I try and put myself in his shoes and imagine how hard that must be, because yes, okay, the father and son bond should be unconditional, but there's always elements, isn't there? No one's perfect.
I get the impression you wished it was otherwise.
Sometimes I do, yeah. If I think about it, I do wish it was otherwise, but that was the way it was, and everything happens for a reason. It wasn't meant to be that way. So
how have you actually come to terms with it all, apart from perhaps helping to lay these demons to rest, courtesy of this interview, which, you've kindly pointed out. But generally speaking,
I think immersing myself in projects, various ventures, for example, all the technology work I do, I think being instrumental in discovering my own strengths is what's helped me to overcome it, I guess. Yes, I am blind, and yes, I have to do things differently, but there's a reason why I have to do things differently. And only with understanding can there be acceptance. And I think I understand that more now as I've got older.
And you felt like you could do all that without the aid of your father in your life?
Yes. Well, it was a case of having to, really. I mean, so the brain is an amazing thing, isn't it? You implement coping strategies. You try not to be judgmental, and it's because it's very easy to judge people. And I try not to be. Like when I think about my father now, I look back and I think, yeah, I wish things had been different, but he had his reasons. I don't particularly agree with them. I suffered as a result of his behaviour and his actions, but it is what it is. There's no point crying over spilt milk. There's no point dwelling on things that you can't change. You've got to pick yourself up. You've got to move on, onwards and upwards.
Do you think you know Martin Rhodes better now?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I do. I feel like my interaction with people who are totally blind, so if you like, people in the blind community, and my interactions with people during my mainstream school years have given me a really good insight into who I really am. That chance to see both sides of the fence, if you like, they've been a fantastic part of my journey to self-discovery.
Do you like what you see now, then?
Yes, I do. I'm a relatively well-rounded human being. I'm affectionate. I'm quite caring. I can be sensitive where needs be. And I love to help people.
And you're honest.
I try to be, yeah. I try to be sincere. I think sincerity is definitely one of my strong points.
Well, you were honest in admitting those qualities, and that takes a lot of honesty to understand and accept that.
Yeah. Although I'm quite modest, and I think this is it. This is something that we all go through it. I think others, for example, your friends, your family members, your nearest and dearest, if you like, they always notice your strengths much more than you do.
Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Philip. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this edition of Against the Odds, the motivational podcast celebrating the lives of those who have conquered in the face of adversity. Produced and presented by Philip Francis Anderson. Whether you have a story of your own to share or you would like to be involved with the podcast in some other way, email ifl@philip-anderson.co.uk or visit the Against the Odds page on the philip-anderson.co.uk website for more information and to complete the guest interviewee questionnaire. This podcast is the property of Philip Francis Anderson. All rights reserved. Any redistribution or reproduction of part or all of the contents in any form is prohibited other than the following. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. Please acknowledge Against the Odds podcast as the source of the material. You may not, except with our express written permission, distribute or commercially exploit the content.